Growing up, Marvel Comics was an integral part in the entertainment I consumed. I'd read the comics, watch the movies, the TV series, and just be in awe at the overwhelming library of superheroes from Iron Man to Captain America. Marvel even released titles in the video game industry for the PlayStation 1 and 2 era. However, these predominantly focused on the Amazing Spider-Man. Spider-Man for the PS1, which released in 2000, and Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, which released the following year in 2001. Are some of the earliest gaming memories I have, and I still think back at how good those games were for their time. During the PlayStation 2 generation, we got even more Spider-Man games for this console, which were video game adaptations of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and from what I remember, they were well received during its time. Today, when you ask someone to name a Marvel game, they'll name Marvel's Spider-Man by Insomniac Games, which was a huge success for the PlayStation brand. Guardians of the Galaxy, developed by Square Enix, which was a solid game but just didn't do well sale-wise as much as Square Enix would have liked. Or people will name The Avengers, which was one of the biggest failures and disappointments in the history of the gaming industry, due to its heavy focus on microtransactions and lackluster endgame content. Yet all these games share the same overall theme that people experience when playing them, which is that they are fun, family-friendly games that can be enjoyed by pretty much anyone if you're into your superheroes. People see these games as the image of what Marvel is, which is superheroes fighting the bad guys through formidable fights and saving the day so everyone lives happily ever after. However, there is one Marvel game that not enough people talk about and probably aren't aware of its existence due to the game's age and because they probably weren't able to play it when they were younger. I'm talking about The Punisher, a game that was released for the PlayStation 2 in January of 2005 and was an 18 age restricted for very good reasons. The game wasn't just an 18 age restricted title, but it also landed itself in some hot water with the ESRB. The Punisher is a third-person shooter action-adventure game which was developed by the same guys who worked on the Saints Row franchise, Volition, and the game was published by THQ. The Punisher is based on the Marvel Comics character Frank Castle, aka The Punisher. The Punisher isn't your typical superhero and doesn't possess any powers such as flying or being able to fire laser beams from his eyes. He's just your average guy who's pretty good with his fists and any weapon he can get his hands on. The Punisher fights a never-ending battle against crime in an attempt to avenge his family's death by killing as many bad people as he possibly can. The game stars the infamous anti-hero after his family was murdered by the Mafia, and Frank dedicates his entire life to the punishment of criminals and becomes The Punisher. The story of the game was influenced by the Punisher comic book storyline, Welcome Back Frank. I've never read the comic book series, but I've heard it's pretty good, and the story in this game was a blood-induced, over-the-top killing spree, and at the heart of it had a really strong narrative. Volition were also able to bring in Thomas Jane, who played the Punisher in the 2004 movie, to voice our anti-hero. The story picks up a few years into Frank Castle being the Punisher, and at this point, he's notorious for his crimes of executing criminals in an extremely horrible manner as part of his plan to seek revenge and cleanse the streets. People instantly recognize Frank and run away from him in an attempt to avoid whatever horrible plans he has in store for them. At the start of the game, the Punisher is almost killed in a hit and run, and so to get revenge, he follows the license plate off the car that tried to murder him to a Mafia chop shop. From here, the Mafia get on the wrong side of the Punisher, and sooner than later, Frank's dealing with the Yakuza, Russian mercenaries, and a friggin' nuke. Through his travels, the Punisher will team up with other popular Marvel characters such as Nick Fury and Black Widow, and he'll have run-ins with Iron Man and Daredevil, which is all unexpected but pretty cool. It also stars some popular supervillains such as Kingpin, Bushwhacker, Bullseye, the Russian, and Jigsaw. Like I said before, the story is really good and none of these cameos or characters feel forced or out of place in the grand scheme of things. The game is primarily you shooting your way through waves of bad guys, and the game is a bloodbath, but in a very deranged and insane manner. The game does not feature an auto-aim lock-on system and instead relies on you to free aim to kill any enemies that you encounter, similar to Max Payne. You can pick up some serious fire to help you with that, such as Desert Eagles, shotguns, assault rifles, SMGs, sniper rifles, grenades, katanas, flamethrowers, bazookas, cleavers, a ton more deadly tools as a means to an end for your enemies. Most of these weapons you can dual wield too, and it honestly feels like Frank is a walking tank during these moments when you've got an assault rifle in each arm. Like, seriously, the man is built like a brick house. And I have to say, the sound of these weapons is music to my ears because they sound so good. Blasting away lead into enemies will leave entry wounds of where the bullets have pierced their bodies, which I thought was a really neat detail for a PS2 game to have back then. In some cases, if you use something with more kickback, such as a shotgun, you can blow off different body parts from your enemies and coat the entire surface red. You can crouch behind cover if you're in a pickle, but I found this to be out of ordinary for the Punisher to do, so instead I would just charge towards my enemies like a killer machine before obliterating them. Frank can grab enemies and perform a quick kill on them, making easy work of them from one of many executions. Some of these are quite brutal, like slitting throats or ramming a grenade in some poor fella's mouth. Grabbing an enemy doesn't mean you have to kill them straight away, and instead you can use them as a human shield to protect yourself, which I found to be extremely useful, especially during some of the final chapters. Of course, once they've served their purpose as a meat shield, they will eventually die, throwing you back into the thick of things. You can dive in whatever direction while shooting to look cool or to get to cover quickly, and it's honestly surprising the distance Frank can travel while diving, given that he's an absolute unit. It's a bit of a shame that there's no bullet time, but I guess Frank Castle doesn't need that to help him out. And even if it did feature bullet time, this game probably would have been called another Max Payne copy. Speaking of special abilities, however, Frank can activate a slaughter mode whenever his blue slaughter gauge has filled from performing high scoring kills. In slaughter mode, a black and white filter is applied, and Frank is invincible and can launch throwing knives at enemies which instantly stun them, which leave them open to be killed by another knife. Or you can just get up close and personal during slaughter mode and perform a quick kill. Not to forget, you also over time replenish health while butchering people. Slaughter mode only lasts for a few moments before you transition back into normal gameplay, but once the gauge has refilled, you can activate it again to help you get through some difficult areas. I mainly used slaughter mode to get through some areas where I was surrounded by thugs while being low on life and I was out of ammo. I would slaughter my way through the masses, healing in the meantime while grabbing new firepower. Slaughter mode has a really neat detail too that I like, since the gameplay audio is reduced and another audio track overlaps with Frank hearing important, terrifying lines from previous characters who he may have killed. It just supports the character profile and lets you know that no matter how many people Frank has killed, he is still tormented by the dead. It's a linear progression game where you advance through the story by clearing different neighborhoods and locations in New York and move on to the next as Frank continues his quest for revenge. Frank will visit iconic locations from the Marvel Universe such as Rikers Island, Fisk Towers, and Stark Towers, which I was not expecting to see when I first played this game over 15 years ago. The game is widely known for its extremely gruesome torture and gore scenes, which are fundamental to the gameplay through the form of standard or special interrogations and special kills. And this is probably where this video will be getting demonetized, because this game features a library of brutal executions which YouTube probably won't like. I mean, look at this guy here. He's about to get drilled in the skull. So if you wish to support this channel and are enjoying this content, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like rating on this video. I would love for you to join our community. So anyway, let's continue. While holding an enemy as a human shield, you can interrogate them through a few different ways, like choking them, smashing the face in, or placing a gun against the head to see if they have anything useful to provide you with. The enemies with useful information are always marked with a skull above their head, but it can be difficult to interrogate them when their buddies are around, so you have to deal with them first. During these interrogations, you have to maintain control without killing them to ensure that their stress level stays in the orange zone for 3 seconds. If you're successful with an interrogation, the enemy will give you some useful information, such as telling you the code to open a door, or letting you know where the nearest gun locker is. Or sometimes you'll get a brief flashback to a traumatic moment in Frank's past, which, if you've read the comics, you will know what they relate to. However, failing an interrogation just has the Punisher killing the guy, which is always brutal to watch. You'll come across different guys who are tougher to break during the interrogations, since their orange zone is much smaller, so it can be difficult to keep their stress controlled. The Punisher can also bring enemies over to glowing spots on the ground, which is normally next to some heavy piece of machinery or some other instrument which could only be used as a means to torture someone in the most graphic way possible. Once he does so, the Punisher will initiate a special interrogation, or what you and I know it as, a torturing sequence, and again, he'll attempt to extract some useful information from the poor guy. This game has a huge unhinged library of special interrogations, and it amazes me how someone was able to come up with so many for every single mission. Ah yes, this guy's about to get his face rammed into some rotary blades. This is definitely getting demonetized. You can perform a special interrogation by holding a guy over a piranha tank, putting a guy's body next to a table saw, placing someone against a wall and place a nail gun against their head, put a guy in front of a zoo cage which has a rhino running at them, pushing someone into a tank of electric eels. The list goes on, and it's all diabolical. This is how the game got into hot water with the ESRB, since they stated the game featured over-the-top scenes of torture and gore. The game initially received an adult-only rating from the ESRB, which means the game received the same rating as Man Hunt 2. And if you've seen anything of that game, you know how graphic your game must be to get one of those ratings. To avoid the adults-only rating, Volition toned down some of the violence in the game and added a black and white color filter over the executions you perform through special interrogations. After changes were made, the game then received its 18 age rating. However, on the PC version of the Punisher, there is a mod which removes the black and white color filter, so you can experience the game how it was intended to be. Frank's also got some crazy good one-liners when he executes a guy through a special interrogation.
Please don't kill me. Bet he was a little short.
You can bring a guy over to a glowing orange spot and perform an environmental execution, such as stabbing a guy on a sacrificial table, throwing a guy at a giant snake in the jungle, or pushing some guy's face into an open bear trap on the wall. And to remind you, this is a Marvel anti-hero, and when you think of Marvel, you don't think of any of this level of detail of blood and guts. Through completing levels, you add more weapons to your armory in the apartment, which you can then use to choose your loadout before each mission. As well, you unlock a hit list with photographs of all the people you have killed so far or plan to kill, and you can also upgrade the Punisher's skills using the points you get from your performance in missions. I honestly do enjoy the amount of freedom you are offered from this PS2 title, because you can just run and gun your way through levels, or you can butcher people by blowing off their limbs and throwing them into wood chippers. The gameplay offered a ton of more things to do in comparison to titles such as Max Payne or Dead to Rights, where the primary focus in those games is to aim, shoot and dive. Volition did an excellent job with this game, so much so that they went on to make the Saints Row games and reused a bunch of the gameplay aspects, elements and animations, which when you look at the gameplay from both, you can definitely notice. So with the gameplay out of the way, let's jump into this outstanding blood-soaked story. The game starts off with a badass cutscene of the Punisher killing several members of the Yakuza before he decides to leave the building, which is surrounded by the entire police force, so he surrenders. Frank is then transferred to Rikers Island and is being interrogated by two detectives, Richthofen and Soap, about the events leading up to the Punisher's arrest, which consisted of dozens of killing sprees. From here, the story is told through a series of flashbacks, jumping back and forth from the interrogation room to moments in the past, leading up to Frank's arrest. We flash back to where this whole story all began, which follows Frank raiding a crack house for some target practice and eventually kills its drug boss by dropping him off the top of the building. The Punisher leaves the crack house and a car attempts to run him over and kill him, but he dives out of the way just in time. Frank traces the car that almost killed him to a chop shop, which is owned by the Nucci family, i.e. the Mafia. Frank makes his way through the chop shop, killing and torturing many members of the Nucci family, because that's what he does best, and eventually confronts the shop's owner. Frank interrogates him for information, but ultimately decides to kill him by launching him into a car crusher and letting the piece of machinery do the rest. Knowing now that the Nucci family was behind the attempted hit on his life, the Punisher is out for some payback. He decides to pay one of Nucci's sons a visit, Bobby, at the Lucky Bar. The Punisher goes in there and donates a few bullets into poor little Bobby. With everyone dead at the bar, Frank decides to head back to his apartment, but finds out that the Nucci family have hired Bushwhacker to kidnap Joan, Frank's neighbor. He makes his way down to the zoo where she's being held hostage and rescues her. But along the way, he makes sure he does his fair share by feeding some of the animals there. Frank is frustrated with what the Nucci family did to Joan, so he decides to crank things up. Frank heads to the funeral of Bobby Nucci, the same guy we annihilated before, and decides to swap out Bobby's body in the casket for his own. And then, this makes for one of the best moments in the entire game. While the ceremony is going ahead, Frank pops out the casket and decimates all of the Nucci family in the room. He searches the funeral home for Eddie Nucci, Bobby's brother, and finds him. Frank drops him like a long distance phone call, and he isn't calling back. It's not over yet, since the Punisher wants to finish the entire Nucci family that night while they're panicking and figuring out what to do next. Frank heads to the Nucci estate and cuts down all the foot soldiers Nucci can throw at him. Frank then fights Bushwhacker and defeats him by, tearing off his arm and using Bushwhacker's own arm to kill him. Talk about something backfiring into your own face. Frank finds Nucci and decides to throw her out of her window. Well, I say throw, he does have a bit of an issue at first breaking the glass, since she bounces straight off her in our first attempt, but eventually we manage to break the glass and throw her out. With the main players of the Nucci family now dead, the Punisher wants to put an end to their drug business, which is operating out of New York City's waterfront. Frank is surprised when he sees the Nucci family working with some Russian mercenaries, and so, he slaughters them. During his rampage, Frank just so happens to bump into Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, who tells him that the Russian mercenaries are being led by a General Krikov, who is using the waterfront to smuggle nuclear weapons into New York City. This is much bigger than he could have imagined, so he and Black Widow team up and dispose of all the vermin at the docks. Frank follows up on the lead Natasha gave him and heads to a suspected cargo ship which he believes is housing nuclear weapons, but instead there he finds slaves and rescues them. Then soon after he escapes, he blows the ship sky high. After a good night's sleep, Frank wakes up the following morning to a knock at his door to find that the Russian mercenaries have sent the Russian to deal with him. Apparently the Russian is a pretty big character in the movie and comics, but sadly I don't know who he is, but I loved his design and lines. Frank decides to use the Russian to do some interior decorating and then tosses him out the window like a Caesar salad. There is some theme going on here because you can already tell the Punisher is really enjoying throwing people out of windows. The drug boss, Eddie Nucci, Nucci, and now the Russian. I wonder who his next window victim will be. Later that day, Frank heads to Grand Nixon Island, which is supposedly where the Russian mercenaries are storing their nuclear weapons. Frank infiltrates the jungle-infested island by jumping out of the plane with no parachute. It's not shown how Frank jumped out of the plane and landed on the island surviving the fall. It might be because he has a body made out of steel, or he jumped in the water instead. I don't know, you decide. Once he's on the island, Frank encounters Nick Fury, who is also here to put an end to General Krikov. Frank and Nick team up like a match made in heaven and head towards the launch station. After arriving, they find out the nuke has already been commenced for launch. In an attempt to stop the launch, Nick Fury is knocked out by the Russian, who we tossed out of the window earlier, and Frank now puts him down for good. Frank enters the command station and deals with General Krikov by killing him with his own weapon of mass destruction. Afterwards, Frank and Nick then escape the island on a plane they steal. Frank chose not to stop the launch so he could make sure the Russian mercenaries were gone for good, and in doing so, the nuke explodes on Grand Nixon Island, wiping it completely off the map. Yep, that's right, he kills all of the innocent wildlife on the island too. What a terrible man. Maybe this is the real reason why he's called the Punisher. The Punisher returns home and finds out through his friend Barry that Kingpin has commenced an operation to take over the former Nucci businesses. The Punisher believes that Kingpin was behind the original hit and misled him into taking care of the Nucci family and the Russian mercenaries. He heads to Fisk Towers for some answers, and once there, he meets Bullseye, who is Kingpin's personal bodyguard. Thinking we were going to take care of Bullseye in a really cool Punisher way, like, I don't know, like throwing a knife into his infamous Bullseye tattoo on his head, Frank instead decides that he should be another victim to gravity and throws Bullseye out the window, just like the rest of them. Frank confronts Kingpin, but Fisk tells him that he is wrong about everything and it's been the Yakuza all along who are planning to take over the Nucci and Russian crime operations. Fist tells us that this Yakuza group goes by the name of the Eternal Sun, and we should focus on taking them down. Frank leaves Fisk Towers and speaks to Barry, who correlates Kingpin's story. Barry tells us that the Eternal Sun are planning to raid Stark Towers in an attempt to steal some of Iron Man's high-tech gadgets and suits of armor, which we can't allow to happen. Frank heads there, and with the help of Iron Man and his team of security, we stop the Eternal Sun, but the Yakuza somehow manage to escape with some pieces of tech. Looking to put a nail in this coffin, the Punisher decides to storm the Takagi building, which is the headquarters for the Eternal Sun. Frank reaches the top floor and confronts Takagi, the leader of the Eternal Sun, but in a plot twist, he informs us that his unloyal followers have sided with an outside force and they have seized control of the Eternal Sun. It tells us that the outside force and new leader of the Eternal Sun is Jigsaw, aka John Saint, the same guy who killed Frank's family. Shocking, I know. Takagi asks us to kill him in an honourable way by executing him with his trusted sword before the Eternal Sun kills him first with a bullet to the head. We oblige Takagi and kill him along with the rest of the Eternal Sun storming the building. The chapter ends with the first cutscene we saw at the start, and we come full circle now, knowing the events that led up to the Punisher's arrest. We see more of the first cutscene where Frank is being arrested by Soap, and it turns out that Soap was Barry all along, and he was acting as our informant. Frank asks Soap to be delivered specifically to Rikers Island, since that is where Jigsaw is being detained. We then jump back into the present where Frank is still being interrogated by the two detectives. The interrogation comes to a conclusion, and Frank finishes up by telling the two detectives that the Eternal Sun are going to rescue Jigsaw from Rikers and free the rest of the prisoners and escape during the confusion. At this moment, the Eternal Sun attacks the prison and Frank knocks out Richthofen. Soap frees Frank and lets him get to work by putting an end to Jigsaw. Frank fights his way through the prison, killing both prisoners and members of the Eternal Sun. He makes it to the roof of the prison where he finds Jigsaw outfitted in a suit of Iron Man armor. Frank and Jigsaw fight on the roof, and I actually found this to be one of the most challenging parts of the entire game, since there were two phases to this fight, which was unexpected. The first phase is Jigsaw flying around in the suit of Iron Man armor and firing rockets, which you have to dodge, and in the meantime destroy his jetpack. Then, in the second phase, you quickly find out that your bullets deal no damage to the suit of armor, so you have to throw grenades at the suit to blow off parts of it until Jigsaw is dead. Frank delivers the killing blow to Jigsaw and then uses the suit of Iron Man armor to disguise himself as Jigsaw to escape the prison. While escaping in the helicopter, Frank throws Jigsaw's body out of the helicopter and everyone lives happily ever after. The credits roll, and once they are finished, we get your typical Marvel after credit sequence where we see Kingpin and Bullseye alive, but Bullseye is badly injured on a stretcher. Kingpin is angered by the Punisher attacking Fisk Towers and starts to plot his revenge against him. Of course, we don't know what follows since we never got a sequel to this game, but it would have been really nice if we did. The game was well received at launch and sold over 1 million copies, which was a massive success at the time for Volition, who then went on to make Saints Row. After completing the game, it has made me want to find out more about the Punisher character by reading or watching all his stories to see what other mayhem he causes, because I think he's a pretty cool character. He's a unique and fantastic character for Marvel to own, and I really hope they consider making another Punisher game in the future at some point, or even a remake of this game, since I think a lot of people will really enjoy it. And hey, it could sell well. This game was unlike any superhero title I have played before, which made it stand out and made the premises of the story that more exciting. Like, I wasn't expecting Iron Man or even Kingpin to be in this game, but they were, and it was a nice surprise. I will admit the game has its flaws, such as the repetitive shooting and killing bad guys, but in comparison to Max Payne and Dead to Rights, the gameplay in The Punisher pushed the player to be creative with their approaches and offered many ways they could do so. The graphics were done really well for its time, and they don't look too bad today. The controls were straightforward and easy to use, which is a blessing from a PS2 title. This game is somewhat accessible since Volition did release a PC version of the game, so if you were interested in it, you can always give it a try yourself, which I strongly urge you to do. Overall, The Punisher is an excellent game, and I thoroughly enjoyed my entire playing experience, which clocked in at around 9 hours. It's got me into the Punisher character, and I'm definitely interested in picking up a few comics. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much. Hopefully after seeing this video, you decide to revisit The Punisher or play it for the first time. If you do, please drop the video a like rating, because I definitely would appreciate the support on this video, since it's probably going to be getting demonetized. If you have played this game before and remember it, please let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. With that being said, I want to give a special shout out to my YouTube members and Patreon supporters: Cyberboy, Camino VT, Salvi, George Kent, Luke AV, BPG, Veggie Hotdog, Whaley, Swift, Stamshaw, Storm Mage, Suhalup, Cheesy Chicken Grunt, Rachel Vincent, Joshua Wright, Toxic Gamer 23, Forest Till I Die, Slack K Gaming, and Cat Smith. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.